Hey, folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. We're back together for another episode of our regular version of the Contrarians, where one of us in the hot seat picks an album from a band that isn't typically considered their best album, but they champion it as their best album. And then we go back and forth kind of in a debate style. Today we have Tim from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. So Tim also hosts his own show on YouTube. So go check it out, give him a like and subscribe. And we're going to be talking about the 70s hard rock band Y&T, although this pick isn't from the 70s, so this is going to be an interesting conversation. So I'm going to throw it over to Tim for a little history of the band Y&T.
Thanks, Marco. Y&T, one of my favorite bands ever. I think one of the most overlooked, underrated hard rock bands that's ever been. For those of you that don't know, Y&T stands for Yesterday and Today. I'm just going to go through their history and their catalog a little bit. They formed in the San Francisco Bay Area, 1974, and the one constant throughout has been their lead singer and lead guitar player, Dave Meniketti. Their first album came out on London Records, 1976. This is what it looked like. And at the time, they were using their full name, Yesterday and Today, although in the concert situation where they started building up a following, fans usually called them Y&T anyway. Second album and the last one for London Records, Struck Down, 1978. At this point, London Records discontinued all of their popular music catalog and just concentrated on classical. That left the band without a record deal. 3 years went by. They signed with A&M Records, shortened their name, and put out the first of the albums that could be considered to be their best album. This is Earthshaker from 1981. This kind of put the band on the map. Best known songs on this one are Rescue Me and I Believe in You. They started to get a following in the UK. They went over and supported AC/DC on the For Those About to Rock tour. So they started building up a following. A lot of the UK rock magazines like Kerrang started writing about them to the point where a lot of folks didn't realize that they were an American band. They started thinking of them as a UK band. And in some circles, they're still considered to be sort of an honorary band when you talk about the new wave of British heavy metal. 1982, next album comes out, Black Tiger. This is the first album where they actually sort of had their logo intact. And this cover art is done by a guy named John Taylor Dismukes. If you look his catalog up, you'll see he's done albums for several bands, including Tigers of Pantang, Lynch Mob, Keel. So he's, in hard rock circles, he's fairly well known. This really cool artwork here. Next one came out in 1983, and it was the first album to chart for them in the US, and one of their most popular albums. It might be another one that's considered to be their best. This is Mean Streak. You may have seen this one before if you're looking through the record racks. More cool Dismukes artwork. This was also their first video for the title song. The title song, Mean Streak, ended up on a lot of hard rock and metal compilations at the time. Most successful album came out in 1984. At this point, they're just churning the albums out year after year. In Rock We Trust. This is the most successful Y&T album. It almost went gold. And I've said this before, it's another example of an album that actually might have gone gold if a proper audit was done. This album put them on the map in a bigger way. It contained Lipstick and Leather and Don't Stop Running. At this point, they had reached a level where they actually appeared on American Bandstand, Dick Clark's American Bandstand, lip-syncing those songs, as all artists did. They just lip-synced the songs. 1985 was probably their peak of success. They wrote this really poppy song called Summertime Girls, which isn't representative of the band and sadly has gone on to become the song they're best known for. It hit the top 100. It's their only song to chart on the Billboard Pop Charts, reached number 55. The video was very, very popular on MTV, and it's the one song that if people know one song by Y&T, it is Summertime Girls, which sort of like More Than Words by Extreme is not representative of their sound as a whole. The song initially appeared on their live album, which came out in 1985, called Open Fire. It had two album covers. This is a North American cover, and this is the UK cover. It is the same album. Later that same year, they released their final studio album with A&M Records called Down for the Count. They didn't use their logo. Really crappy pink background to it. The band kind of, not the best dressed on this album. Once again, they threw Summertime Girls on here, and it didn't really make any difference. So at this point, they changed drummers and labels. They signed with Geffen Records and put out this album, Contagious. This is actually a promo copy of Contagious, very glammed up on the back cover. It did not do much for them. It still didn't improve their fortunes all that much. This one is just, this is a UK only anthology. I just got it because I'm a huge fan and just wanted to get whatever was out there. 1990, they put out their final major label album. They're still on Geffen. It's the second one they did for Geffen, called 10. More on that in a bit. Of course, A&M in response did what every former record label did and put out a best of. This is called Best of 81 to 85. They did a series of live shows in their home base of the San Francisco Bay Area, I believe Oakland to be exact, at the end of 1990, and that was it. Those shows were recorded for this live album, Yesterday and Today Live. And then the band was dormant for a few years. Just basically, they'd been pushing to very minimal success. The narrative with Y&T is they always came just almost close to breaking big, and they never quite did it. There are a lot of reasons why that could be, many reasons outside of their control, I'm sure. They got back together, and in the mid to late 90s, they put out 2 independent albums. Got them on cassette here. The first one was Musically Incorrect, 1995, and they put out this one called Endangered Species in 1997. Since that time, they've only put out one additional studio album in 2010 called Face Melter. I'll get the booklet out so we don't get the glare off of it. Once again, they returned to the classic sound, but also the classic John Taylor Dismuke's artwork with his dragon here. And the most recent thing that the guys put out was in 2018. They put out this little acoustic EP. Very active on social media. Their website is called YandTrocks.com, or if you go to Meniketti.com, that'll also take you there. So that's basically the story of Y&T. And generally, when people talk about the classic period of Y&T, they're going to refer to the first 3 80s albums, Earthshaker, Black Tiger, or Mean Streak. None of those albums are my contrarian pick, of course. That's why we're doing this. But that's kind of a history in a nutshell of Y&T.
That's exactly what I was going to point to. That new wave of British heavy metal era of the early 80s is probably what they're best known for, especially if you look at all the statistics. Those are the albums that usually pop up as like the top 3. Also, almost everything I look at has a different order of Earthshaker, Black Tiger, and Mean Streak. They kind of just fall in at 1, 2, or 3, all 3 of those. Even though like the height of their popularity, like you said, was Summertime Girls, Down for the Count era, kind of like mid 80s. That record usually doesn't go anywhere near like the top few records when you look at like objective statistics. But we are here to talk about a contrarian record, and I know you have a very contrarian choice, and I'm going to throw it back over to you to explain and pick your contrarian choice for best Y&T record.
Okay, so generally, as a fan, you tend to have the most nostalgia, sort of the most warm, fuzzy feeling for the point where you actually discovered a band. And for me, that was in 1990, and the album that they had out was 10, their second Geffen album. And this is generally considered to be probably one of their worst albums. So I love this album. It's not the classic lineup. So the classic Y&T lineup is Dave Meniketti on lead guitar and lead vocals, and 3 other guys who sadly have all passed away. Joey Alves on rhythm guitar, Phil Kennemore on bass and occasional vocals. Phil was also their primary lyricist, and drummer Leonard Hayes. And in drum circles, guys that know about this band love Leonard Hayes because his trademark was that he only had a single bass pedal on his drum, but he could play the fastest bass drum patterns that you would swear he's playing a double bass drum kit, but he wasn't. And if you are yeah, into the new wave of British heavy metal, what's known as the trilogy, Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, those are typically the go-to albums. And as a matter of fact, when the band plays live, you're going to hear more songs from those albums than any other album. So the band recognizes, even though their set list, they usually work in obscure songs here and there. Especially if they're the type of band, if fans will shout out a song, they'll at least try to play it. I've never seen them in concert. They don't tend to play anywhere around the eastern shoreline in eastern Canada and in New England, which is kind of my base for seeing concerts. But they certainly did make the rounds. They opened for everybody. They opened for Motley Crue. Famously, Motley Crue's very first gig was opening for them back in 1981. Sorry, they mentioned that in The Dirt, in the book, not the movie. And then 4 years later, they returned the favor in 1985 by having Y&T open some shows for them. But they toured with Dio. They toured with Aerosmith. They toured with, like I said, AC/DC, Sammy Hagar. Like they were there on these bills, if not as an opening act, then as a special guest. So people in the industry, like bands, really tended to like these guys. And a lot of the Sunset Strip bands, the early ones, Van Halen, Quiet Riot, a lot of times they'd open for these guys, or they'd be playing at the Starwood or the Whiskey right alongside them. It's just that, in my opinion, Y&T suffered from never having the right record label at the right time. That's kind of my opinion there. I think that if those albums, and I'm not going to argue that those trilogies, the trilogy of albums, Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, are not all excellent albums. They are. I just think that they would have been better served had they been on a label like Atlantic or Warner Brothers or Elektra, or maybe a band or a label that was hard rock focused. A&M Records was not hard rock focused. A&M's rock bands were like Bryan Adams and Styx and 38 Special. I don't think they ever knew how to market them. And also part of the problem is I think that they had kind of a cumbersome band name. What does Y&T stand for? What does that even say to the casual fan? So it's really, really, you can trace a few things back and go, well, maybe this isn't why they didn't quite break through, even though I think musically they were so capable and so versatile and should have broken through at different points in their career. The new wave of British heavy metal could have been big for them, but again, their American label weren't promoting them properly, my opinion. It also has to be said, and this is where my contrarian side comes into it, that I'm not strictly what you would call a headbanger. I'm much more of a hard rock guy than I am a heavy metal guy. And Y&T themselves would never have referred to themselves as heavy metal, although they certainly have moments that you would have to call metallic. If you listen to songs from those albums I mentioned, like Hurricane and Mean Streak and Black Tiger and Open Fire, Forever, like there's a lot of songs that are just, they're metal songs. But they got really, really melodic as time went on. That started with In Rock We Trust a little bit. They started to use some outside writing. In Rock We Trust was completely co-written with a guy named Jeffrey Leeb, also known as Jeff Paris. If anybody's got like Mr. Big albums or I can't think, Vixen. There's other examples. If you look up Jeff Paris as a songwriter, you'll go, oh, I know that song. I know that song. That was their most successful album. It was more accessible, although I still think there were some heavy moments on there. Summertime Girls should have been a hit single. It really should have been. The problem with Summertime Girls is that there was no album to link it to. Who's going to buy a live album by a group they've never heard of just to get one song? And by the time Down for the Count came out, the video had made its run. The single had made its run. There was no definitive album. I think that's part of the problem. And I think that's A&M not getting them. Not getting them. I mean, even though I'll talk about that song as not being representative of them, it's a good pop rock song. It's deserving of the status it got, and it should have been a bigger hit. And I just don't think that the label knew how to promote. It's all about promoting. And when you look at bands that had the full page articles back in Circus and Hit Parader magazine, there weren't that many of them for Y&T. They paid a little bit of attention to them, A&M that is, for In Rock We Trust, and that's the reason that In Rock We Trust is their most successful album. Fast forward, Leonard Hayes leaves the band in 1986, and they hire a guy who a lot of people out there will know named Jimmy DeGrasso. Jimmy's played with a ton of people, probably most notably Megadeth in the late 90s that they went on. He played, I believe, on the World Needs a Hero album. So that's probably the biggest band that he's been involved with. I know he played it when Suicidal Tendencies, which is an odd name to throw out at one point, but he's done a lot of session work and played with a lot of different people. They brought him in as drummer. So they glammed up the band considerably for Contagious, and John Kolodner from Geffen Records really wanted them to achieve the Bon Jovi sound, which was huge in 1987. And the single and the title song from the Contagious album sounds like it could have been a Bon Jovi song. I don't have a problem with that. A lot of the hardcore fans did. And Contagious, overall, there was no follow-up to that. They did one video for it. They wouldn't let them do another video. So now we find ourselves in 1990, and a band that's been around for almost 20 years at this point, still trying to make that one final push to break through. And 10 is an album that really should have done it. Of the 12 songs on this album, I think there are several potential singles. Again, Geffen only let them do one video for the lead single called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which is the video I saw on Much Music's Power Hour and got me hooked on the band. This is just a CD single of it. Didn't get a lot of play, but a fine song. I think it reached number 27 on the mainstream rock chart on Billboard. No follow-up. And, without that big single, there's not going to be much for a tour. They didn't land an opening slot on another tour. And, by the end of the year, they decided to knock it on the head. But it wasn't for lack of good music. However, if you are a fan of the heavier stuff, you're not going to like this album. It's going to be a pop metal album. Although I don't think this album is nearly as poppy as Contagious was. Contagious was a very focused attempt to break in to the market that Bon Jovi had provided to get harder rock bands onto the radio with pop hooks. I don't think the album was particularly well produced, but also Contagious suffered from the fact that it got released right around the same time as the Whitesnake 1987 album and Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, which are two albums that Geffen Records sunk a lot of money into promoting. Obviously, it paid off. So they got the short end of the stick when it came to promoting. So what they have here is, I think, a more mature version of Y&T, and I kind of consider this their latter-day Whitesnake period, meaning that it's a sort of more of an elegant hard rock. There are some outside writers on here, but for the most part, the material's written in-house. This album was produced by the late Mike Stone, who was a well-known producer. Obviously, he worked with Queen, he worked with Journey, and this album also features on 9 out of the 12 tracks, not Jimmy DeGrasso on drums, but Steve Smith, session drummer extraordinaire, best known for being in Journey. And the reasons for that are all lovingly detailed, and I should have mentioned this when I mentioned their history. On with the show. This is a DVD documentary that the band put out at the end of 2019, which is definitive a documentary as you're going to find. Anyway, highly recommend this too. Jimmy DeGrasso was not pleased with the fact that he wasn't well represented on this album, but anyway, this has probably 4 potential hit singles. This could have been a big blockbuster album had Geffen given it the attention that I feel that it deserves. There's a few reasons why it also might not have broken big. So I'll go into those. Also on this album, Joey Alves, the rhythm guitar player, had left. They got a guy named Steph Burns, which is another name people might know. So it's a different lineup that's on this album. So album cover, obviously very striking. They wanted to get attention. This is the record version of it, the vinyl version, which isn't easy to find. This is actually a German. If you went to buy the CD in a store, see this, and you go, well, what is that? Same band photo on the back. If you went to buy the cassette, you saw this, which is closer to what the record looked like. If any of you out there remember long boxes that CDs came in that were 12 inches tall and held the CD on the bottom, this was the long box cover, and this was the CD. This is an unopened CD, actually, and it folded out to a larger picture. So I think there was a little bit of cognitive dissonance. It's like, what exactly am I looking at here? I've also got this, just because I think it's kind of cool. This is a radio station copy I found, which actually might have made a better cover. It would have drawn you in a little bit more, great big 10 on it. And it actually was their 10th album. But like I said before, if you're a fan of their heavier stuff, you are going to totally dismiss this material. But if you're more of a melodic hard rock person, you're going to love this material. And I do. Also, this was the period where I got into the band. I started trying to find their back catalog, which is one of the hardest back catalogs ever to fill in, especially pre-internet. So there's a lot of songs on here, a lot of potential hit singles. It wasn't. That's my Contrarian pick for best Y&T album. I don't think there's a better example of what they were all about, because there are heavy moments on here. But again, most people are not going to agree.
Yeah, well, that was great. You brought up a lot of good points, but there's a couple of things I think right off the bat we can kind of go back and forth on. One thing is, I'll concede to you that they did seem to get lost in the shuffle at the time. And I think that was part of the reason why they kind of took a hiatus for a while. They kind of went their separate ways because the record label didn't really push the record, I think, the way they felt it should have been pushed. They didn't put out any other singles after Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. One thing, so I'll give you that point. One thing I think you'll agree with me on is you kind of just went through the different covers of the album. You pick any one of those and try to stack it up to one of the classic records. The classic records, those album covers for, Black Tiger, even In Rock We Trust, are just so cool looking compared to 10. Just seems so tame. You could put any band name on the CD version or even the record version. The record version I think is a little bit cooler than the CD version of 10. But I mean, like Black Tiger, like those are awesome album covers. And I think they kind of, I didn't really like the album cover to 10 very much. In Rock We Trust, and it's funny because you and I, we always get into the discussion somehow. When we talked about Journey, we talked about the video game Journey and stuff like this. There's a video game, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, there's an old video game called Turrican. You put Turrican cover next to In Rock We Trust cover, it's almost the exact same cover. So I'm going to have to look into that now and see if it's the same artist.
I was just going to say, I bet you, I think he did do album or video game art as well. I don't think he was just limited to album covers. The other thing, it's funny because as far as spending money, Geffen obviously spent a little bit of money on them for Contagious, the first Geffen album. I like this cover here. It's like a beaker exploding, and the logo looks really cool. This is Hugh Syme. This is a Hugh Syme album cover. So, I mean, Hugh Syme doesn't come cheap. So obviously they spent some money. But yeah, what I want to know is, okay, you put a beautiful woman on the cover, you're going to get some attention, but who decided on orange? Like, who decided on orange as being, even when you look at that's just not appealing. So, I don't know. I guess they wanted something that would stand out, but you want it to stand out for a good reason. Now, because this album sounds the way it does, it wouldn't make sense to have like the Black Tiger or Mean Streak, the menacing looking thing on it. But I don't know. It just wasn't, it didn't necessarily have to make any sense, because if you think about albums that were big in 89 and 90, I mean, Aerosmith's Pump with the two trucks on it, what the heck does that mean? But you see it and you immediately, oh, that's the new Aerosmith album. So, yeah, I think they kind of, probably little to do with the band themselves. They probably kind of shot themselves in the foot right off the bat with, hey, where's the band that does that Don't Be Afraid of the Dark single? I want to buy that. And you look at that and you go, what am I looking at here? Yeah, I agree with you. It's not the best album art they could have gone with.
And you've already taken some of my ammo away, because a couple of the things that I wanted to bring up, you kind of already mentioned. 1990, the style of music that they were doing, and if you look at reviews, even user reviews, and you look around, a lot of people will agree that this album seemed to be a little bit too late, because you had that sound, or at least the kind of this record sounds a little more hair metal-y, and that was kind of at its peak, 87, 88 even. Where you're talking about like Whitesnake, this kind of came out just a little bit too late, where even Sea of Tranquility, they did the Pete Pardo, he did like a top Y&T album's video, and he likes Y&T a lot, and he put 10 at number 11. And I think that's what he said, the same thing, kind of like it just came out a little bit too late. I've seen reviews too where they said this might have even, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark might have even been a bigger hit had it come out a few years earlier, kind of thing, right? And it's interesting too that you brought up Whitesnake because, and I like the track Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, and it's often referred to as a ballad. It's not even really kind of like a ballad. It kind of rocks. But if you
it's
watch,
a mid-tempo.
you watch the video and you kind of squint your eyes and kind of cover your ears a little bit, and it's almost a Whitesnake. You could kind of confuse somebody if you kind of, with their eyes and cover it. It sounds like Whitesnake, even like a song like Hard Times. Okay, one of the user reviews, I'm going to bring it up now because one of the user reviews said some of the riffs and licks are quite straight rip-offs. Either the band ran out of ideas or they did the rip-offs just to show their respect to some of the bigger names out there. A bit flat production. Some of the songs sound lifeless. And when you kind of listen to the record, which I don't even mind the record, like I don't mind the song Hard Times, but I listen to it and I think of like Van Hagar. Like there are influences there that I kind of, especially when you read that quote and you listen to the record, you can hear stuff that, that kind of reminds me of this band, or that kind of reminds me of that band. And they even kind of look like Whitesnake at that period.
Yeah. And I always looked at, it's funny because that video, like I said, that was the first thing I saw and heard that really, I remember seeing the video for Summertime Girls, but I was 11. I wasn't really into harder rock then. But I think that the Don't Be Afraid of the Dark video is the best video they did, because they did some really bad videos. Certainly not unique in that way, but some of their earlier videos were just bad. But the Don't Be Afraid of the Dark video, there's a little narrative with like a couple and they're swimming and stuff like that. But the band is playing in like so many bands did this abandoned warehouse, right? And there's like, barrels with fire coming out of them. But I thought the band looked really classy in that video. And that's why I keep coming back to it. The Whitesnake thing is classy. Some people might find it strange that I'm referring to Whitesnake as classy given David Coverdale's lyrics. I'm simply talking about the music, right? It's actually one of those songs that none of the band members had anything to do with. It was written by Taylor Rhodes, who was a Desmond Child, Jim Vallance type of writer, and a guy named Robert White Johnson. And those two names will come up on different songs, including Aerosmith's Crying, although I think Steven Tyler, maybe Joe Perry too, had a hand in writing those. I do see there's a few things. Dave Meniketti does kind of have a Sammy Hagar type of voice. Like if there's one guy that he sounds like, to those who've never heard them, he kind of sounds like Sammy Hagar. And I don't have a problem with that. Van Hagar, that's my Van Halen era that I got into, and I love the older stuff too. I went back and bought all the Dave stuff. But when I started listening to music seriously and the radio and stuff like that, that's when 5150 came out. So I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, famously, and he hates reading his old, hearing his old reviews, but in Martin's very first book, Riff Kills Man, he gave the first 5 albums 8s or 9s, I think. I think Mean Streak, he gave it a 9, was the highest one.
And
Contagious, he gave a 0.
Yeah, Martin's not super liberal with his 9s either.
No. So, yeah, and it's funny because he described them the way that I described them in Mean Streak. He called it hard rock brilliance. That's how when they're firing on all cylinders. But he gave Contagious a 0, and he gave 10 a 1. And that's my favorite album. But that's fine. I mean, we did the Patreon episode where I had to sit and defend Def Leppard's Hysteria as my all-time favorite album, and that's a famous 0 from Martin. But so, and like I said, he's not contrarian. That's what most people think, and obviously the record sales will back that up. Mm-hmm. But again, that's when I got into the band, and I appreciated the fact that they could do really melodic, commercially minded hard rock songs bordering on pop metal. At it as selling out. I look at it as versatility. So, it just depends on where your main focus is. But I think if people, and I do know people that do really like this album and don't really have any of the previous Y&T stuff, but they tend to be around my age, and that was the album that was out. I remember at the time, thinking that Don't Be Afraid of the Dark should be this big hit. I only saw the video the once, just happened to catch it. And even in Circus Magazine, which was a very supportive of hard rock and that whole scene at the time. They didn't even have a full page article for 10. They had like a sliver down one side with an interview with somebody else. So money was not spent. And I remember Hit Parader magazine, where there was one article, one interview that they did with Dave Meniketti talking about it. So how are you supposed to get your message out there when you're not even, and another example, like I've got the CD single to this, but I don't ever remember seeing singles by them back in the day. That was back in the heyday when cassette singles were popular. And I know there's a cassette single for that, but I don't ever remember seeing it. I would have bought it. Other people might have bought it too.
There's only a handful of Y&T singles. I think there's like 5. And Don't Be Afraid of the Dark is one of them. And Summertime Girls famously was the only one that charted on the Billboard chart. Like other than there's the rock, the other singles charted on the rock charts, but
they had 6 songs that charted on the rock singles chart. And
maybe there was 6.
I think Summertime Girls hit 16 on the rock chart. But yeah, Mean Streak and Don't Stop Running, those charted, but none of them were charted very high. So, you got to create the awareness that this stuff's out there. Yes, if it's good music, it should, do it anyway. But the fact of the matter is, by 1990, you're right. The grunge thing was not too far away. And there were so many hard rock bands.
Well, not even grunge. I want to throw this in there too, because it's like they're sounding like Whitesnake in 1990, but you got to remember too, 1990, you got bands like Skid Row starting to come along now. So that's now even another evolution of the music that they're already, that's the main field that they're in, and it's already evolving past what they're putting out, especially their look. Because like you said, that video looks like a 1987 video. It looks like an era that had just passed. And I think that's a common criticism with the record 10. Not to say that the production's terrible or that the songs are terrible, because there's some good tracks on 10. I like the song Lucy. Going Off the Deep End has some cool guitar work. It's a very high tempo track. City, there's some great songs on it, but it's just the timing is just not great there.
City, I always thought, and I love that song too, but City, I always thought was there trying to sound like Cinderella, as far as having like the acoustic intro and then it kicks in. Sounds like the beginning of the Long Cold Winter album. And you're right. Like I've said this many times, it takes a couple of years to realize it's a new decade. And you're right. There was a changing of the guard. So there was Skid Row and there was Winger and Tesla and something else that Dave Meniketti talks about in this documentary is that their experience and their years were working against them by this time, because radio programmers and magazines would go, literally, those guys again? Really? I mean, if you haven't made it by now. And again, I'm going to bring up Whitesnake. They came out in 1978, a different lineup, and they managed to become one of the biggest bands in the world by 1987, thanks to John Kalodner and Geffen Records. Same thing with Aerosmith. There was some bands, the age thing didn't work against them. It kind of worked for them. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it said, why couldn't Deep Purple have come back the way that those other bands did? They kind of did, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the case of Y&T, where they'd never had a gold or platinum album anywhere in the world. And I think there was a bit of I hate to say it, but there was a bit of a loser. These guys really, come on, guys, give it up. But, it's a different scene because, again, talk about timing. If you rewind 10 years from there, go back to 1980, and not a band that sounds anything like Y&T, but I'm thinking of REO Speedwagon. Their big album, High Infidelity, was like their 11th album. Bands signed deals and record companies were willing to give them more time to make it, but I think one big thing that had to do with it was video. Videos cost so much money to produce. Videos had movie budgets. It would be nothing to spend $200,000, $300,000 on a video. And if you don't get that instant return with people starting to buy the album, from a dollars and cents perspective, it made sense that Geffen would go say, oh, well, we just lost our shirts on that one. Let's do another video. And the sad thing is your second single isn't likely to have nearly the impact as your first, because your first single is your best shot to get out there. And it came and it went. And I would say by 2 weeks of me seeing that video, the album had probably fallen off the charts. I think it only got to like 110 on Billboard, which is crazy. It's a shame, but at the same time, what it has done is built up one of the most dedicated cult followings any band has ever had, to the point where those guys started touring in earnest back in 2003 again, and they're playing Sweden Rock, and they're playing what's the big one called Vakken. They're playing all of these big festivals, and people are losing their minds. Oh, I can't wait to see Y&T. So it's almost like, because they sat out for a long time, because the grunge thing did happen, it kind of leveled the playing field. So now they're on tour with bands who were way, way more successful than back in the day. But now they're all just kind of doing the same thing, and they're playing to the same audiences, which I think is a really good thing. My only problem is I wish they'd do another album.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me throw some statistics at you, and because there is some research that I did, so I want to get this out there. So typically the albums that you see, if you look at, and I already mentioned this, like rankings lists and stuff like this, it's usually like Mean Streak, Black Tiger, Earthshaker. Kind of come in 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, like different stuff. Like I said, Sea Tranquility rated the album 10, ranked it at number 11, which is pretty low, although he didn't really have a lot of disparaging things to say about the record. Live setlist statistics. The number one record that is represented live in Y&T concerts is Earthshaker, then Black Tiger, then Mean Streak. 10 comes in at number 8 as the most represented Y&T album live. During their 2020 tour, the average set list only included the song Lucy. During the 2019 tour, their average set list only included the song Come In From the Rain. In terms of like some reviews, AllMusic named Earthshaker as the best released in the band's career, and on 10, which they rated very low, basically said 10 just didn't deliver the goods. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark has a good riff, but much of the record lacks a strong hook. Slick mainstream metal without much style or flair. It's no surprise the group packed it in shortly after the release of 10. A couple of user reviews. These are fans. These aren't critics. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark is pure brilliance, a true power ballad, rocker of 80s ties. Excellent. The rest is pretty bad. Rating only 1 out of 5 just for the mentioned song. Another review, tired sounding album by a tired sounding band. Avoid. Another review, easily the band's worst album. They tried too hard to fit in with the times. I like Mean Streak, Hang 'em High, Midnight in Tokyo. Like that's a classic. I like that era of Y&T. I went and listened to the 10. I didn't hate it. There was some good tracks on it. Like they picked Lucy they were doing in 2020 live. Lucy's a great song. Like there is some good stuff on here. I pretty much said,
and it's funny because some of those songs I don't even think they did on the album's tour. I mean, I don't know what their set lists were back then, but I do know that on the live album Yesterday and Today Live, which they recorded in 1990, the only song on there is Hard Times. So it's almost like they went back and learned the songs. The only drawback with 10, if I have to be completely honest, I'm not big on the production. I don't care for the drum sound. And that's no disrespect to either Jimmy DeGrasso or Steve Smith. It's more to do with Mike Stone. I think it could have done with a heavier production on the drums, because I'm thinking more of like a Bruce Fairbairn, Bob Rock type of production for that would have sounded really, really good. People that say it's their worst album, I have to say, have you listened to Down for the Count? And that's not even my least favorite album by them, but the keyboards are smothered all over that album. And there's no keyboard player in Y&T. You know what I mean? It was actually Claude Schnell from Dio played all the keyboards on that album. My personal least favorite Y&T album, this is just me, is the album Struck Down, their second album. And it isn't that I don't like it. It's just that when you really like a band, one of them's got to come in last. There's a couple songs on it I don't care for. I don't care for some of the vocals on it. And the production famously sounds awful, I think. So 10 to me doesn't even, I don't know. I definitely don't think it's their worst album, but that's just me.
Pretty contrarian choice, though. Even like, the best that album does, like in terms of like rankings list, is Best Ever Albums. Is a website that kind of does things objectively. So it's not a group of people deciding which albums are where they rank in the list, and it's not a group of fans voting on it. So like Ranker had 10 come in at number 5, and Ranker is user fans like vote on what records they like to see, right? So like for example, Return of Rock, which is, I guess it's critics choosing, or it's a little different, but they had 10 come in at number 6. Best Ever Albums is the most objective. So they take all the rankings lists and they take all the chart positions and they take all the album sales statistics, they put them all together, and they come up with almost like a computerized list of what the top albums are. And that's the best showing it has. And that comes in, 10 comes in at number 4 on that list, with Earthshaker number 1, Mean Streak number 2, and Black Tiger number 3. So that's interesting that they came in. And they'll give you 10's ranking out of every album ever put out. You know what I mean? And I think it came in at like number 21,000 or something like this, right? But I'd have to go back and check that out. But that one's a very objective, and that seems to be the best showing that 10 had in terms of all the rankings list I looked at, which is all objective. It doesn't matter what number comes in, but for you, it's number 1.
Yeah,
but it's a pretty
and I knew that I had an uphill battle for this one, trying to make a case for it, because, okay, it is hard to argue with those early '80s albums. I will say this though: to me, Earthshaker and Mean Streak, Earthshaker and Mean Streak, to me are both perfect hard rock albums. Black Tiger, I don't think it's nearly as good as everybody says it is, because people tend to remember the title song. They remember Open Fire.
The album cover.
They remember Forever. There are, I think, a couple of really bad songs on Black Tiger. My Where the Highway is like a throwaway track. It's like a bad Sammy song. And Barroom Boogie, which is like a staple for them, is this, Martin calls it like a lazy stripper blues. I've never been the biggest fan of that song. If I go see them live, I'll sing along because it's Y&T. You know what I mean? But people forget, not everything they touched turned to gold back then. I can't argue with Earthshaker or Mean Streak as being somebody's favorite Y&T album. Black Tiger, I have a little bit of an issue with. I'm like, yeah, it's good, but I don't think it's quite as good as everybody thinks. And some people put that as their favorite. It's like, oh, well, okay. So, but again, if somebody grew up and they weren't necessarily a fan of the metal side of things, and when I say metal, I mean like old school metal, Maiden, Priest, stuff like that, Metallica, and they tended to like the more melodic stuff, they're probably going to like 10 as well as they'd like anything by Y&T. But I always think that they were melodic. It's just they were always melodic, and they always had good hooks in their songs. It's just that they did it in a heavier context in the early 80s. But again, it didn't translate into sales, so they had to try something. And I don't think that 10, I think the 10 sound is, I think it's got more to do with Y&T than the Down for the Count or the Contagious sound. A lot of that might have to do with Mike Stone giving it a very, there's nothing radical about the production on 10. That's partially to the detriment. You might say it could be anybody singing it, or it could be any band doing it. But on the other hand, even though they branched the two record labels, A&M and the Geffen, Down for the Count and Contagious, neither of those albums are very well produced. They were both produced by Kevin Beamish, he's worked with REO Speedwagon. He's worked with, I think he worked with Keel. I really don't like his production. He's got this really blocky drum sound, and he's got an equally crappy drum sound for Leonard Hayes and Jimmy DeGrasso. So, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the production on 10. I think that if it had a more booming production, like I said, that Bruce Fairbairn, Bob Rock, really heavy snare production might have burst out of radio airwaves more than it did, because Don't Be Afraid of the Dark starts out with just a da-da-da-da, like a drum fill. And if it was more of a, who knows, it might have done more. I also have heard criticisms of Dave Meniketti's vocals. I don't think his vocals ever sounded better than they did on 10, but his voice did change a lot. So if you're a fan of Earthshaker and Black Tiger, the early 80s, his voice was a lot deeper back then. It started to change around the time of In Rock We Trust, but I think it's matured. Like by the time you got to 10, I think it matured to the point where he could sing a heavy song as easily as he could sing a ballad. I just think there was so much talent in this band. I think Phil Kennemore was great. Not as a bass player, he wasn't just the one note bass line that a lot of 80s guys did. He actually, wrote bass lines a lot of the time. And I think his lyrics are a little bit off, a little bit more to them than the average rock song. A song called 10 Lovers. He wrote by himself. I think it's one of the best ones on the album. It's one of the many that I think should have been a single. The one song that I'm really surprised that if it had been bigger, there probably would have been some litigation, is the song She's Gone. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, the riff sounds an awful lot like Motley Crue's Too Young to Fall in Love, but the chorus is almost taken word for word from the Hall & Oates song called She's Gone. She's gone, I got to learn how to face. It's like, that's a pretty specific line. It's like, wow, they just went ahead and put that in there, and nobody tapped them on the shoulder, said, you want to rewrite that one part there? But the riff sounds a lot like Too Young to Fall in Love.
Yeah, I guess that's it. I pretty much said my piece. I think you're pretty contrarian, objectively, subjectively, even in a few different ways. Your pick seems to be a contrarian pick. Other than that, I guess that's it for today. I want to thank Tim for coming on the show. Please go and visit Tim's Vinyl Confessions on YouTube. Give them a like and subscribe. Tim's amazing. He knows a lot of stuff about the stuff that he really enjoys and likes. And other than that, you can follow and like us too on YouTube. We also have a Patreon. We do live chats and stuff like this. So hopefully we'll see you over there. And other than that, I guess we'll agree to disagree, and we'll live on to fight another day. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tim.
That's it, dude.